So welcome, hello everyone, to the 2024 Virtual Summer School Series entitled Program Development Through the Lens of Access and Belonging. My name is Emily Smith. I'm a program associate in the Community, Professional, and Economic Development Unit at the University of Arkansas System, Division of Agriculture, Cooperative Extension Service. Today's session title is Designing for All, Universal Design for Learning and Digital Accessibility. We're definitely in for a treat today. Before we dive in, however, I wanted to remind folks about a few logistics. If you have questions, please submit those in the Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom instead of the chat. We're going to be utilizing the Zoom Q&A feature. Please submit those questions throughout, and we will look at those questions at the end and answer as many as possible. Those that we don't answer, we'll definitely follow up with the materials to registrants after the week is over. I also really want to point out that we have two co-facilitators helping today from our Virtual Summer School Series Committee, Arminta Lockhart and Tia Gregory. Thank you both so much for your help today. And now I am just over the moon excited to introduce our speakers. First, I'm going to introduce Lisa Linfield. She's an instructional designer for the Extension Foundation. Lisa has over 25 years of experience in instructional design and technology, e-learning course design, and faculty development. She's currently the instructional designer for Extension Foundation, and her previous roles include course development manager and director of online team at Edgewood College, Learning Design and Technology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She was the technology education specialist for UW Extension as well. She holds a graduate certificate in instructional design and is certified in the Section 508 Trusted Tester, which we'll discuss today. I'm also pleased she'll be joined today by Robin Ertz, Program Manager in Professional Development for Iowa State University Extension Outreach. Her master's in education focuses on curriculum and instructional technology with certificates in instructional design, crucial conversations, and crucial accountability. Robin has been serving Iowa State University Extension and Outreach for 27 years, working primarily in the IT unit and currently in the professional development unit. She's been leading the organization's digital accessibility initiative since 2008 and is most versed in creating accessible digital documents, which she'll definitely touch on today. Let me tell you a little bit about this session. It will be presented in two distinct parts. In the first section, Lisa Linfield will provide an overview of the Universal Design for Learning framework, referred to as UDL. She'll explore the origins of universal design learning and its core principles, suggestions for ways to apply UDL, how to apply the mindset when designing learning experiences and or programs. In the second half, Robin will take the baton and present information about digital accessibility, including Section 508, defining digital accessibility, defining 508, and also ways to curate accessible spaces in the digital realm. And so I really am just so excited to turn it over to Lisa Linfield to start off our presentation today. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you, Emily, and to your committee as well. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. But before we get started, I wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge that July is Disability Pride Month, which celebrates diversity and visibility of the disability community. So I think it's really very telling that we are meeting all together this week for these topics, and especially for today. I'm really excited to co-present with Robin. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you all. Great, so it looks like we've got, as commonly happens, we've got quite a variety of experience levels with UDL. So this is a great kind of meta experience with talking about universal design for learning, because one of the key tenets is we really want to get a sense of the variety of experiences of our learners and try as much as we can to design for a wide variety. So thank you so much, everybody, for giving me a little heads up about that. So no matter your experience level, My hope is that by the end of this section of our presentation today, you'll have a sense of basically what are those core principles of UDL. We'll talk about some new things that are coming in UDL, give you a heads up about some new revisions that are happening to the principles of UDL. We'll talk about some sample strategies, as Emily mentioned. I also wanted to share a concept called the +1 thinking when it comes to UDL. So that's a little heads up about that. It's a chance for you to kind of dip your toe in the water if this is a new topic for you, or even if you've used it quite a bit. +1 thinking can come along at any time. And then in the end, I'll also have some resources and places for you to go to learn more about UDL and to get some more inspiration for implementing this in your own programs. So we all came here today with a variety of characteristics. So we've got different abilities, we've got different levels of experiences with UDL. We have lots of different circumstances. So we really can't assume that any of us in any kind of learning environment, meetings like this, courses that we might be doing, we can't assume that any two people are coming with the exact same combination of skills or barriers or circumstances. And so we each really have what I would call an accessibility story. And this idea is not mine originally. I heard this at a podcast, and I'll share that link with you in my resources as well. There's a podcast called The Accessible Learning Experience, and the host of that podcast always starts out by asking his guests what brought them to their work in accessibility, what inspires them to work in that field. And so he asks, what is your accessibility story? And so I invite you all to reflect upon that throughout this session today. And just kind of keep that in mind as you start to think about implementing this framework. So I'll share my story with you as a way of an example. And mine really starts in my childhood. And accessibility and UDL is really near and dear to my heart because these issues affect folks that I'm really close to. My grandfather was blind. My father is blind. And so I grew up with a very deep understanding and appreciation for how they interacted with the world and what kinds of barriers they encountered. I'm also the parent of a neurodiverse child. And so traditional schooling was incredibly challenging for him. We had to do a lot of fighting and arguing for proper accommodations in different learning environments for him. Over time, I have had times when I have had, injuries, some chronic health issues, things that have impacted the way I can interact with my computer at work, with classes that I've been attending. So there have been times in my life where I've really needed and benefited from accessibility features like transcripts, captions, things like that. So more and more as I reflect on the kind of learner I am, I've really come to understand that everybody has a story. And as if we come to our course design, our instructional design processes with deep empathy for our learners, we really start to understand that variability is the norm. And that is really what's at the heart of UDL. So by way of a definition, UDL is a framework for designing curriculum, goals, methods, materials, assessments, assignments, all the components of a learning experience so that we're reaching all learners regardless of circumstance. So that could be ability, disability, age, cultural, linguistic background. There are many, many varieties of us all. UDL is also a set of principles that honors that variability of all learners, and we'll talk more specifically about a few of these in just a second. And finally, my advice is to think about UDL as a mindset and not a checklist. So when we get into looking at the UDL guidelines, you will see that there are lots of details in there. And it can feel quite overwhelming to take a look at that big long list and all these checkpoints and feel like we need to dive into all of those at once. But really, if we're coming to our design processes with this idea of inclusion, welcoming, and belonging, we're really already doing the work of UDL. So as you were reflecting on your accessibility story, and you heard a little bit about mine, and maybe you know some other folks in your life, there's a whole variety of learning challenges that you may be aware of. Some of these are visible, some of these are invisible. So there might be text-based barriers if someone has dyslexia or reading difficulties. There might be auditory processing challenges, motor skill barriers, executive functioning challenges, social interaction challenges, language comprehension barriers, if we have English language learners, for example, in some of our sessions, attention and focus issues, or memory and recall issues. So there's a wide variety of these things. And what I love about UDL is that all those challenges are really viewed as opportunities for us to improve our instructional design and not as problems or deficits within the learners themselves. So a little bit of a background about UDL. This idea really kind of originated with a man named Ronald Mace. He was an architect, and he's often known for coining the term universal design. And it was for his work with advocating for people with disabilities. So on the screen right now, there's a photograph of a building with some kind of writing superimposed on that photograph to indicate the various accessibility accommodations to that physical space. So things having to do with adjusting where the buttons for the elevator are, or perhaps widening a doorway to allow access for a wheelchair. And Ronald Mace himself was in a wheelchair, and he was a student at North Carolina State. And his wheelchair did not fit through the bathroom door, and he had to be carried upstairs to attend classes. So as a result of those kinds of experiences, he developed this concept of universal design with the idea that products and buildings, learning spaces, should be usable to the greatest extent possible by everyone, regardless of ability or situation. And that is rather than having to be reactive with accommodations later. And so some of you may have heard of this idea of the curb cut effect. And the idea here in this cartoon that I'm sharing shows a curb cut with a whole variety of folks who are using that curb cut. Certainly individuals in a wheelchair would use a curb cut, but folks with a bicycle or somebody pushing a box, or excuse me, a cart of boxes, maybe dealing with your luggage or dealing with a child in a stroller, that curb cut becomes useful for a wide variety of people. And so the idea really that got its origin in architecture and product design is that when you design with accessibility and inclusion in mind, you improve access and usability for everyone. And universal design for learning extends this concept to the field of education. It advocates that we design to accommodate diverse learning needs right from the start. So there are three main principles for universal design for learning, and they are offer multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. And so we'll talk a little bit about all these in detail. I've included also on this slide a link to the UDL guidelines as they exist now on the CAST.org site. So CAST is a nonprofit. They are the kind of the go-to spot to learn anything about UDL, and I have more references from them later on as well. So let's talk a little bit about what these sort of guidelines look like. Try not to be nervous or scared off by all the detail on this slide. I'm not going to spend lots of time going into detail about this, but I wanted you to just get a quick overview of what the guidelines look like on the CAST site. This is the guidelines as they exist currently. And the engagement, representation, action, and expression column are defined here by colors. And then there are rows. So each principle is broken down into specific guidelines that then have specific checkpoints. So lots of detail here. The idea here, though, is that you can come in and kind of mix and match and choose which type of checkpoint might be most relevant to the learning experience that you're trying to build and the goals of your courses. These guidelines, however, are going through pretty major kind of reimagination. This has been going on for the last several months, and the new updates are due to be announced at the end of July. Still very much based on concepts of accessibility and inclusion, but there was a call from educators and practitioners and researchers to bring a stronger equity lens to the guidelines, to some of the details of this. So these are going to be still grounded in neuroscience and the way that our brains tend to learn, but the language is going to be more learner-centered, less of a linear approach. They're intending to bring in more concepts of identity and learner variability in the way that these checkpoints are listed, and to bring about more value placed on kind of collective learning and working together in groups of people. So again, don't worry too much about all the details here, but I will be sharing the links for getting access to this, this kind of graphic organizer, they call it, and watch the CAST site at the end of July for the published version of these guidelines that have been updated. So let's dive a little deeper into some of these specific principles of UDL. And I thought maybe an easier, more accessible way to do this was to think about a little mini scenario. So if we imagine that perhaps we're trying to design a food preservation workshop, what are some ways that we could start to build in some UDL elements into a course like that? Now, when we're talking about the engagement principle of UDL, we're talking in the neuroscience terms, we're talking about what they would call the affective network in our brains. So the part of our brain that deals with the emotional and motivational process that has to do with learning. So learners, no matter what kind of session we might be running, they're coming to us with different preferences, interests, and needs when it comes to what motivates them and keeps them engaged and persisting through that learning. So the idea here in terms of UDL is that learning is not just a cognitive process. It's also an emotional and motivational one. So we might have learners coming with varied experience levels, differences in terms of what kind of equipment they might need in order to stay fully engaged with the content. They might be coming with cultural differences related to food preparation and preservation practices. And so some of the ways that we might think about this particular principle of UDL, we might want to try to purposefully connect those learners' interests and background experiences to the examples that we share when we're teaching. We might want to try to foster collective learning in terms of group activities where students can support and work with each other, and give students lots of choice and autonomy of what kind of topic they might like to work on. So this, again, is just a very small snippet, lots and lots of different types of ways to engage with this type of principle in terms of UDL. When we look at representation, again, keeping our little mini workshop in mind here, this has to do with what neuroscientists would call the recognition network of the brain. That's responsible for perceiving and understanding the information, recognizing patterns, recognizing concepts. So accessibility is really foundational to this particular principle with UDL. So there are, again, many varieties of barriers that our participants and students might come to in terms of this particular network in the brain. There might be language barriers. There might be accessibility barriers based on different types of learning challenges. So to address this type of principle in UDL, we would certainly want to think about providing other types of formats rather than just text. Maybe there's a video, maybe there's a podcast, maybe there's some type of audio material we could provide. Are concepts or terminology complex enough that some kind of a glossary or clarification of vocabulary and symbols might be a nice enhancement to our materials? True accessibility kinds of issues like providing captions and transcripts would be essential here, and also ensuring that any hands-on demonstrations that we might be doing in our course can be physically accessed by anybody who might have mobility or dexterity challenges. And again, inviting learners to share their own cultural practice and intentionally integrating culturally relevant examples into our design. And so the third and final principle of UDL has to do with action and expression. So in neuroscience, this is related to what we would call the strategic network of the brain, responsible for planning, executing, kind of having some regulation over our own learning, problem solving, demonstrating what we know. So some potential barriers here could be Again, challenges for learners who have different types of disabilities or perhaps learning challenges. Differences in prior experience with the topic. So ways that we might try to enhance this principle of UDL would be to offer different options in the way that not only that we would demonstrate skills in the course, but that students could then turn around and also demonstrate their learning to us as well. So providing support tools like checklists or templates or diagrams, even providing them choices for the way they might turn around and also demonstrate their learning to us is important here too. Adaptive equipment certainly comes into play when we're talking about this principle. If we're doing a food preservation workshop, do we want to proactively make sure we have specialized cutting tools or jar openers available, for example? Digital tools for planning and organizing any way that we can sometimes provide, in addition to physical handouts, are there digital equivalents that we can also share? And again, because there's kind of this renewed emphasis on collaborative learning experiences, can we facilitate small group activities where the learners can work together and support each other? So all these different small little snippets of examples, these may be things that you're already doing in some of your course designs. If you're not, maybe think about, are there some additional ways that you can start to incorporate these in your teaching? One of the best books that I know of related to universal design is written by Thomas Tobin and Kristen Belling, and it's called Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone. I've got a link to this in my resources as well. And the authors advocate for this, what they call a +1 strategy. And the goal here is to kind of think about, if you've taught a course or a program before, think back to where those pinch points or issues may have popped up in the course before, or if you haven't taught it yet, anticipate. See if you can think about what types of learner barriers might be coming into play. Where do participants have questions and make frequent mistakes? Do participants frequently ask for more elaborate explanations or asking you to explain it in a different way? Are students commonly needing flexibility, or can you anticipate places where some flexibility could be offered? And so as the authors of this book say, think about, is there just one more way that you could help learners stay on task? One more way that you could give them information, or one more way that you could let them demonstrate their skills back to you? So that's what we mean by the +1 strategy. So I've got a few resources for you, and I think these are probably going to be shared in the chat as well, but you can always reach out to me for more. The first is this Wakelet collection of UDL resources. So that's a place where I've curated some readings, links to books that I've mentioned today. There's a number of videos, and some of my favorite podcasts are listed there too. And so if you go to that Wakelet, to that bit.ly URL, it will take you to that Wakelet collection. CAS, that I've mentioned a couple of times, is that nonprofit that created the UDL framework and guidelines. So there's their main link. Lots of wonderful resources there. And again, check back there, because as they update the guidelines and resources, those will be posted there as well. And the last little tidbit I wanted to be sure to share with you is an AI tool called Ludia. So whether or not you've experimented with AI before or not, I would encourage you to check this one out if you're at all curious about UDL. This is an AI, the developers call it a thought partnering tool, and that really is what it is. This was designed by educators. And the idea is that you can come to that AI tool and in very natural language, type in what kind of a learning experience you're trying to design and ask questions about how could you incorporate some UDL into that experience. And it provides some wonderful details for you. So I would encourage you to check that out as a way to just get some additional information. And so with all of that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Robin, who's going to kind of take it from there and talk about how UDL really intersects with accessibility in the digital realm. Over to you, Robin.
And let's see, should be sharing my screen there. Can you see it okay? Sorry, yeah, I'm one of those people I just asked. Okay, so it's good to be here this afternoon, and thank you to our hosts for their time and effort to put all this together and offer this opportunity nationwide. I appreciate that. Iowa State University Extension and Outreach started what we called our e-accessibility or digital accessibility initiative back in 2018. And since then, we've been reactively remediating over 2,500, equivalent to about 25,000 pages of research-based documents and publications, and proactively teaching employees how to create accessible digital documents. What I'm sharing today is based on years of research, focus groups, and experience. So what is digital accessibility? Digital accessibility is about designing and implementing digital technologies, platforms, and services that can be accessed and used by everyone, including individuals with disabilities. This includes the digital platforms and electronic documents you and your organization create and share. At Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, we aim to make electronic documents accessible to those who use assistive technology, like screen readers. We also teach skills that empower our employees to create digital documents that are helpful for those who experience color blindness, low vision, cognitive disabilities, like dyslexia, for example, and mobility challenges, like needing to use a joystick, and how when we create documents in the ways that we teach, that helps other users, not just those who necessarily don't have sight or low vision. Okay, following the diagram on the right is a functional definition of accessibility. That is to provide students the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as students without disabilities, with substantially equivalent ease of use. This definition also applies to digital accessibility. Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, as Lisa has referred to it, and digital accessibility are both educational approaches that aim to increase learning access and reduce barriers for students. When used together, they can create a better experience for all students, including those with disabilities, and can help avoid the need for individual accommodations. So if we just design things with that in mind up front, that benefits a whole lot more people than we probably realize. Universal Design, or UDL, is an educational methodology that focuses on designing coursework that considers the needs, abilities, and expectations of students. Digital accessibility refers to standards like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, sometimes abbreviated as WCAG, that evaluate the accessibility of digital tools. Some ways UDL and digital accessibility can intersect include UDL's representation principle that emphasizes presenting educational materials in multiple formats to recognize how learners process information differently. Digital accessibility also addresses how learners might need accommodations. For example, teachers can provide audiobooks of digital textbooks for students with visual or cognitive impairments, or include alternative text for images in multimedia presentations for students who use screen readers. UDL and accessibility can also intersect in terms of engagement, especially online. For example, course developers can ensure their courses have built-in tools that engage learners in multiple ways, make goals explicit, minimize distractions, and provide frequent knowledge checks. These interactions should be designed intentionally to also meet accessibility standards. Accessibility compliance really is core to any design. So if you look at this graphic that I borrowed from Elizabeth McBrien and Heather Garcia at Oregon State, accessibility is core to any design. UDL goes beyond the requirements of accessibility to meet the needs of all users and learning style preferences. In an inclusive design process, UDL and accessibility are always the end goal. As a whole, inclusive design emphasizes the importance of feedback and iteration. So inclusive design is always looking to seek and how can we improve things and what new iteration do we need? How do we keep up with things? What kind of feedback are we receiving from the learners? So that is inclusive design, including ideas and concepts provided by our learners. Okay. Section 508 is where we really get into digital accessibility, and that refers to a section in the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in federally funded programs or employment. That Rehabilitation Act has since been updated a few times to incorporate the digital side of things. That started in 1998, but as technology is updated, so too is Section 508, which was most recently updated in 2017. So what does this mean to us? As institutions of higher education receiving federal funds, we have an obligation to provide accessible educational programs and materials. So really, digital accessibility is required by law. We won't delve into the specifics here, but it's important to recognize that accessibility is a legal compliance issue. Okay, so now that you know what digital accessibility is, I'm going to share with you 6 things that you can start doing today to make your Word documents more accessible. And what I'm going to do, let's see. My little chat went away. Hang on, I'll get it back. Okay, so in the chat, I'm entering in a site where, okay, it's not working. Okay, I'm going to put it into the Q&A section, and nope, we'll get it at the end. Okay, so I actually sent this URL to our presentation hosts today, and they'll go ahead and add it to the end. But the information that I'm sharing with you today, these 6 tips on how you can start making things accessible right now, I'm going to kind of walk through a quick how-to kind of tutorial. So don't think you have to memorize it, because really this information is available out there, and you could probably do a Google search to find it. But I have a reference site that I'll share with you towards the end of this presentation, where there's some really nice training videos available that will walk through the same information. So let's start with saving documents. First of all, use a descriptive file name that identifies the document and/or its purpose. And if you're using Microsoft Word, use the .docx format. This allows assistive technology to understand the document's language behind the scenes. Okay, so let's look at 3 names that are not accessible, 3 document file names that are not accessible. The first one, document1.doc, it is not saved in the .docx format, so it really is not accessible to assistive technology. That's an older file format. The file name application.docx, it's saved in the right file format, but application is pretty vague. And so somebody that uses assistive technology like a screen reader would need to open up that document to completely understand what exactly that document is. And then yesterday's list.docm, that's a Word file that contains a macro. So .docm is not an acceptable file format for saving documents for them to be accessible. Okay. So now let's look at documents that are accessible. Notice the first one, PD_2024 year-end underscore report.docx. That's pretty descriptive in the file name, and it ends in .docx, as does cell phone request application instead of just the word application. And NAEPSCP underscore 2024 VSS underscore information.docx. That's the right file format. Now, some of you may think about, you may go through several iterations of a file. And if you're like me, sometimes I go, okay, here's my file. Now I call it final. Well, this is final version 2. Nope, this is really the final one. Notice that that is not accessible, because really that's not very clear what that file is. And so if you end up with a long file name like this, just rename it. And this file, this very long file, does not end in .docx either. Okay. It's a common practice to create a type style by changing the text directly in the document. So for example, you could highlight the text and apply different font styling, like a larger font size or bold formatting or additional spacing with returns or spaces. While these changes are made to the font styling, they'll provide visual structure for some users. The document structure behind the scenes needed for navigation by assistive technology is still missing. For a document to be accessible, use predefined styles. That's a must. These aren't just a good idea, they're actually required for accessibility. So Microsoft Office provides default styles, and that really is in all of its different applications. You can see on screen that styles can be found in the Home tab and then the Styles section. Again, this is not necessarily for you to memorize, but just to raise your awareness. The styles that you see on screen are actually styles that are branded for our organization. By default, those colors are actually blue. The colors that you see as red are actually blue, the different style headings. And they may be in a different font. These are using our official fonts. Sighted users often scroll a document or page quickly and look for big, bold text or headings to get an idea of its structure and content. Screen readers and other assistive technology users also navigate documents by heading structure, assuming styles are used. So you can see on the left-hand side of that little image that we've got some different heading structures. And let's pretend I have a 188 county fair book and somebody's using assistive technology. They could, if they wanted to, go to the table of contents created by using headings, and they could click on that link and go directly to page 162 where the information about horses resides that they want to see. Or somebody could use that structure on the left-hand side there and say, oh yes, this is kind of like a table of contents, and then just go to the section on removing empty tags. So you can see that headings benefit us in a lot of different ways, or people that use screen readers, sighted people as well as others. Okay, pages should be structured in a hierarchical manner. As I go through this explanation, a helpful visual may be to think about a book or a newspaper. A heading 1 is usually a document title or a main content heading. Generally, there's only one such header, and it's usually the most important. Sometimes it's also called title. A heading 2 is usually a major section heading. A heading 3 is usually a subsection of heading 2. A heading 4 is usually a subsection of heading 3, and so on, ending with heading 6. And if you've ever worked with web content editing or web pages, you also are familiar with H1, H2, H3. So those kind of structures, same thing here. Technically, a lower degree heading should be contained within headings of the next highest degree. So for example, do not skip heading levels, such as using a heading 4 directly below a heading 2. Always use heading 3 next, then heading 4, etc. Documents with a proper heading structure provide screen reader and other assistive technologies with structure to navigate by, viewing a list of all headings on the page, choosing top level headings. So if I were using assistive technology, I could say, read me all the heading level 2s in this document until I get to where I want to go, or level 3 or level 4, and then reading or jumping by headings. Use headings to break up content and make finding information easier. Assistive technology cannot infer meaning from formatting characteristics alone, such as bolded or underlined text. Using words built-in styles will create a structure that assistive technology can quickly access and interpret. If you have multiple heading levels, use a different style for each heading level. Okay, and you can see here in my example, I've got some different styles for different heading levels. Okay, use alternate text. Alternate text provides a textual alternative to non-text content, such as images. Alternate text serves several functions. It is read by assistive technology in place of images, allowing the content and function of the image to be accessible to those with visual or certain cognitive disabilities. It's displayed in place of the image in browsers if the file image is not loaded or when the user has chosen not to view images. So sometimes, if you've ever gone to like web pages, sometimes you see a little square where an image should be, and if you hover over it, that alternate text might show if somebody's put that in there intentionally. A key principle is that computers and assistive technologies cannot analyze an image and determine what it is without alternate text, although AI is getting a little bit better. The alternate text should be accurate, use proper sentence structure, including quotes, commas, and periods, be briefly and clearly expressed, not be redundant. Stay away from using the phrases image of, graphic of, or logo of to describe the image, because sometimes when screen readers hit an image, they will say image of or graphic of. So that might be redundant if you include that in your alt text. Try to limit it to 125 characters because some screen readers stop reading after they reach 125 characters in alt text. They should be written how a screen reader should read it, like spelling out words rather than using abbreviations and explaining punctuations as it should be read. For example, sometimes we use a hashtag in our images and we say hashtag strong Iowa. So in the alt text, instead of putting the pound sign or the hashtag sign, I would actually put in the word hashtag strong Iowa. We've also found, like, when we abbreviate things like 238 bushels per acre, if we say BU, it will be very literal and it will read boo per acre. So just be aware of that when you're adding alternate text. Complex images that cannot be explained in 125 characters can be handled in a few different ways. You could revise the image to make it more accessible, break it down into parts, include text in the page content explaining the image in more detail. So you could have just a paragraph that explains that image. Make the alternate text of the image a link to a separate file that provides the information as text or audio to further explain the image. Okay, to add alt text, you would right-click on the image and select View Alt Text. Now, I don't necessarily have every step shown here, but again, those videos will help walk you through these. And then when you get to the alt text box in Microsoft Word, as shown on screen, it'll give you some ideas of what to write, and it does recommend 1 to 2 detailed sentences. On this particular image, AI generated the alt text, a person walking a dog. So, and it does say description automatically generated with medium confidence, and that was because AI created that, so I'm not sure. Your job is to verify that that image is correct or not, and then proceed accordingly. If an image just serves a decorative function, you could mark that last box there marked as decorative, and then a screen reader would skip over it. So for example, if I have a horizontal line between 2 columns of text, and then I have a little break in a horizontal line, and then I go to just a single column, 1 page wide text, I might just mark that as decorative, because somebody that uses assistive technology doesn't necessarily need to know that there's a horizontal rule there. It doesn't change the meaning for them at all. Okay, tables. The purpose of tables is to present information in a grid or matrix and to demonstrate relationships between variables in an easy to understand fashion. Sighted users can easily scan a table to make associations between data in the table and their appropriate row and or column header. Assistive technology users make these same associations with tables using column headers. Tables should not be used for formatting or any other purpose than to present tabular data. Cells should not be left empty or merged for formatting purposes within tables, and try to keep them simple. Use preset styles offered, and this image is in Microsoft Word, by clicking on the down arrow on the table design ribbon and selecting a table style. If applying table styles to an existing table, highlight the table before selecting the style. So it's just like anything you would do in Word. Highlight it first if you've already got it, and then change some kind of attribute. Add alternate text to tables. Someone using assistive technology would be able to hear the alt text or summary and decide if they want to read it or they want to skip it. How? Make sure that the cursor is in the table, right click on the table, and then go to table properties. That'll bring up the image that you see on the right side of the screen there. And then you would fill in the information in the alt text boxes highlighted there on the right. Okay. All right, let's talk about links. Hyperlinks in documents allow users to open web pages, navigate to headings and bookmarks within a document, and open email links. Assistive technology users may skim a document by navigating from link to link. Avoid ambiguous link text that's difficult to understand out of context. For example, click here to order a new computer today. It's kind of like somebody using assistive technology does not know what the link click here is until they get to the words order a new computer today. It's kind of like if you had gone by your turn and then GPS says, oh yeah, turn back there. So think about how your users consume the information that you're providing. And then the second one, or also in that same example, just says to use descriptive link. So we'll see some examples of correct usage of links. And then the second example, visit this URL to order a new computer today. This example uses the actual link within the text of the document. That's not horrible, but if you have a really funky, very long link, it can get really old for somebody using a screen reader. So instead, what could you do? Well, you could say, order a new computer today. So now you're using descriptive text for your link. Or if you need to add a URL, you could do a combination. You could link the descriptive text, and then you could add that URL. This example provides the hyperlink text as well as the unlinked full URL in the document. This is especially helpful if a document's also being printed out or may be printed out. Okay, and then the last tip I have for you is using an accessibility checker. Newer versions of Office 365 have an option to have the accessibility checker run continuously while working on a document. So to activate this, as shown on the screen, you would first go to Files and then Options, and then Accessibility for Windows, or a couple other clicks for Macs. And again, that's in those training videos that I'll reference in just a minute. And then you would check the box for Keep Accessibility Checker Running While I Work. And that's about mid-screen there in that image capture. Microsoft Office provides an accessibility checker for identifying and repairing accessibilities, available in every software except Publisher. The checker classifies accessibility issues into 4 different categories. Errors means content that makes a document very difficult or impossible for people with disabilities to access. Warnings, content that in most but not all cases make the document difficult for people with disabilities to access. Intelligent services means that content is automatically generated, maybe like an alt text by AI, and this requires a small manual review for accuracy and proper contextual use in the document. And also then tips, content that people with disabilities can access that might be better organized or presented in a different way. Oh, and if you are always running the accessibility checker while you work, you'll see at the bottom, that long image at the bottom of my shared screen there, it says accessibility good to go. So it's saying it hasn't found a problem yet, keep going. So that's good news. All right, so to manually run the checker, you could go to your Review tab and then see towards the left it says Check Accessibility. You would click on that and then it would check your document. You get what's called an inspection results pane that might show up on the right or the left, but it will show up and then it lists errors, warnings, intelligent services, and or tips. And then if you went and you clicked on that specific item on the right, another box would appear and it would say, this is the error and this is why you don't want it. Why fix it? Because this, and how to fix it this way. So it's getting very, very user-friendly. Okay. So we just walked over some information for like 6 different things you could do to make your documents accessible now. We tell our staff, don't panic and don't make every document accessible right this minute. But as you go to revise documents, intentionally start weaving in accessibility. So that will seem less overwhelming. Some information and online sharing resources that I have. And if you have some, you could type them into the chat as well. But the first URL is section508.gov. That's where there's a lot of this kind of training available, and the videos are very easy to understand. Iowa State University Extension and Outreach also has an e-accessibility initiative. And so you could go to our site and look at it, like our roadmap for how we got started as an organization and steps to take, and some free publications that we have that might help in your journey and your organization. I also offer a quarterly cooperative extension digital accessibility community of practice, and that is a mouthful. But if you are interested, right now it's about 20 different institutions and about 40 different people. We meet regularly, and we just organically say, okay, what do you want to talk about today? What bumps have you run into? What's an aha moment that you've had? What would you like to share? We schedule about 2 hours, and we usually go about an hour and a half-ish. So if you're interested in joining that, just let me know via email or it's at iastate.edu. And then I'm also part of EDUCAUSE's IT Digital Accessibility Community Group. So if your institution is an EDUCAUSE member, there's another access there for you. So in summary, in my part of the presentation, we talked about what digital accessibility is and how universal design for learning and digital accessibility are related, and then looked at a couple of practices you can start implementing right away to make your documents accessible. And if you would want a copy of the references that I used in this presentation, happy to share those with you. Just let me know. And I'll go back and stop sharing. Of course, that little box got covered up. Okay, and ready for any questions if you might have them.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, we do have some questions. And so first, looks like Julie Hill, she is referring to saving documents. And she asks, what about PDF formats? She's thinking of documents that are a website for downloading.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that you start the documents Microsoft Word and then you save as a PDF. And just think it's the same process. If you go in Microsoft Word and make sure that they're accessible and you run the accessibility checker and it says it's great, it's going to transfer over to PDF very well. So
Okay.
documents, yep. Okay. Question.
Okay,
Yep.
so thank you about answering that. Another question from Deborah Good. She wants to know, are the underscores important in file names?
Great question. No, not necessarily. I think I wrote that in there. I use those because in that training website, that's what they recommend. But I have not found in any of my research or in my focus groups and our use of screen readers that any require underscores in order to read the document name. Good question. Thanks for catching that.
Okay, great. Okay, another question Deborah has is, are Google Docs accessible in the same way as Word doc files are?
Another great question, and I'm sorry, I don't use Google Docs, so I do not know the answer to that question. But if anybody else in our viewing audience knows, please share via the chat.
What about Linda? Do you want to weigh in, Linda?
I can, what I know about Google Docs is the similar kinds of features that Robin shared in terms of headings, alt text, those types of concepts also apply in Google Docs. So her advice translates actually quite well to working in the Google Docs environment too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Linda. Okay, so Cheryl Newberry asked, in a graphic that has an image and text, shouldn't the alt text spell out the text on the image?
Yes, it should, Cheryl. Great question. I'll give an example. Like we have a tagline, hashtag strong Iowa. So my alt text would literally spell out the word hashtag, but then I would also spell strong Iowa because that's the text that's on there. Or for example, you might have a word mark. So spell out what is in your organization's word mark. Use those words. Great. Thank you for that question.
Great. Okay, so we have, I look like Flores. What's the best way to ensure accessibility with using InDesign? Are you familiar with InDesign?
Is a whole nother beast because it is a lot more powerful than Word. So it has a lot more layers to accessibility. And you could take classes on that, but you know, with InDesign, there's a very high learning curve, and there's also a very high or strong learning curve to make things accessible in that too. So the best I can do right now is to encourage you to look up some kind of training for that.
Okay. So we look like a couple people want to know, will these resources be available by any chance that you guys can share your presentations in PDF format with us in the future? Linda and Robin, because look like people would like to have copies of your actual presentation.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or Samantha or Tia or Emily, do you know the best way to share that out?
Yeah, and I can take over. We have about 2 minutes. Thanks so much, Armenta. We have some questions we didn't get to, and we'll be sure to answer those. We'll have our speakers who are the experts answer those and include them in the post series materials, which will include the recordings, copies of the PowerPoint, and then the final Q&As that we didn't get to. And those will be housed on NEPSDP's webinar archive page, and we'll send all that information out to the registrants.